And we're back, and we're moving into our second conversation for this morning. We are joined via Zoom by attorney at law Ludlow Black. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing well.
All right. So Ludlow, you are actually going to be sharing with us some updates as to what's happening in Jamaica with their state of emergencies that are being used for crime control. It's really important that we kind of set the backdrop because we know our local context. We've used the state of emergency a few times in Belize to kind of calm down the crime situation. But this has been a practice in Jamaica for some time now.
Yes, it's been the practice that as soon as there's a flare-up in violence, they now use the state of emergency to go in and make arrests of anybody that they see that is, going to be either part of their investigation or possibly somebody that they see as a person of interest. Yeah. So yes, it has been used, and it's been used a lot in Jamaica, much more than in Belize.
Yeah, and in terms of the response from the public in the effectiveness or in the acceptance of the state of emergency, what is it like there?
It's mixed. It's mixed. Some persons accept it because it does reap some kind of reward because you do get some criminal elements of the street, but others have concerns. Persons have their family members that are locked away for indefinite periods of time. Sometimes the breadwinner of the home is locked up and the house suffers as a result. So there is a good and a bad that comes with it, and there's a mixed review on the part of the citizens.
Yeah. And over the years since Jamaica has been using the state of emergency as a way to curb crime, the reduction in crime, it's still been minimal, hasn't it?
It's been minimal, even with the state of emergencies that have been declared recently. I think I hear them reporting a reduction of about 2% in crime. And Jamaica is a large country with a large crime problem. So though we appreciate the decline, it's not significant, and we want it to be much more.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we're having this conversation this morning is that there have been some major developments in looking at the response to the state of emergency in Jamaica. There was a challenge in the courts about the constitutionality of having these young men indefinitely detained for the purpose of crime control. Can you explain to us what was brought to the court?
Okay, just in early July, I believe about July 9th, an application was filed at the Supreme Court for a writ of habeas corpus in relation to 5 gentlemen. 2 attorneys make applications in relation to 5 gentlemen. The gentlemen have been in custody for over a year. Most of them have been in custody for over a year. And the issue then is whether or not their constitutional rights have been infringed. And naturally, the attorneys advance those points, that their clients' constitutional rights were infringed, and the fact that the Emergency Powers Act and the regulations in and of themselves are unconstitutional and should be done away with, right? So they led their application with that. And the feedback from the matter coming after the matter was that, yes, the judge accepted their position that, yes, this is unconstitutional. And indeed, the actual order was granted for the gentleman to be brought to the court on Monday, which would have been yesterday, because the application was done last week. So, that is the whole genesis of the issue, the fact that these gentlemen were in custody for a very long period of time. The issue is that they never got to come before the court to face either a trial, they never got a bail hearing, they never got their liberty considered before a court. And that was the whole issue of it. Yes, we want to have the state of emergency to keep crime down and lock up certain criminal elements. But if we lock up somebody that isn't a criminal, we put their life into disarray, and we infringe upon their constitutional rights, even if we suspect that this person is a criminal. And we have evidence against them, we need to charge them within a specific period of time. We can't hold somebody for a year and we don't either charge them or release them. That is too much. And that is the feeling and the sentiment coming out of Jamaica and coming out of this ruling.
Yes. In Belize, if we're to use the parallel now, I think that the state of emergencies that have been used, there hasn't been a whole lot of objection, I think, from the wider public. But we do hear concerns specifically from family members and from people who are looking at this from a purely human rights perspective. Can you talk a bit about that? Because in fact, the issue of human rights is a big part of the argument of the state of emergency in Jamaica.
Yes, it is a big part of it, because human rights is I guess the bedrock of your society.
Yeah.
If you're not treating your citizens properly, then you don't really have a society or a population really. The situation really is that the human rights goes to the core of it, but also the fact that persons have decided now to speak out louder about their own personal human rights. It has gone from a situation in Belize where in Belize, you have a different crime situation than we have. Our crime is much more, we have much more persons. And in Belize, it might be easier to lock down 10 people, 15 people and stop a crime situation. But in Jamaica, you have to do that in numerous communities over a longer period of time. So in the state of emergencies here, we say short state of emergencies probably for about 30 days. But in Jamaica, they kept extending them. So they lock you up for 30 days and extend for another 30 days, extend for another 60 days. And once you've been arrested under the original SOE and it keeps being extended, you're can be in custody indefinitely. You understand? And that has happened to a lot of persons. So really and truly, that is the human rights issue that is at hand. And even in Belize, we have to be very careful. We're not at that stage yet, but we might get there if it is that we don't start taking the legislative and the certain little decisions that can quell and stop us from going down that path.
So the judge's decision on the 5 men that brought this case forward has now prompted a wider conversation of whether or not all the detainees should be released.
Yes. Yes, it has.
Tell me about that.
All right. This application is nothing new. It's not the first time it has been done. And now that it's been brought up and the judge has really spoken strongly on it, it then has a bearing on everybody else, because certainly other persons and their families are going to be calling their attorneys now and saying, listen, if we were able to get these persons out under this certain set of parameters, then everybody should apply to everybody and the other detainees as well, some of whom have been in custody longer than the gentlemen who were just taken to court. So it does provoke a wider discussion. It does have a wider application for everybody, not only in Jamaica, but in Belize. And that is what we need to grapple with, and that's what we need to make the public aware of going forward.
Now, and I think the judge's comments were really interesting when I was reading the media reports. He clearly, Judge Morrison, actually said that you cannot just arbitrarily, I'm using my words on his, take away a man's freedom. And I think that's the core of the issue. When you see what is being reported at this time, there still are some people who say that it's working. Let's still keep them detained. Are you surprised by the reaction?
Yes, I mean, I'm not surprised by the reaction, because crime is a terrible thing and people want to feel safe. So if they realize that crime is going down by using whatever means it is, then they'll be okay with it. The problem is when the tool that you use starts to hurt the person using the tool. And when you start to be in lockdown and your son, who is not involved in crime, is being locked down for months on end and his future is at risk, that is when you start realizing that it has a bearing on you as well. And you need to speak out and you need to be involved in this discussion, because you could also be locked up. Anybody could be locked up under the state of emergency. So we have to start having this discussion in Belize before it gets to a position where in Jamaica we're using it frequently. We're arresting persons and keeping them for a year and a half. That should never happen here in Belize. And we've got a clear example here in Jamaica, and we need to act now so that this is not the situation that pervades here in Belize.
I appreciate you making that distinction. So one of the primary differences is that the length of time that these men have been detained in Jamaica is a lot longer than what the gentlemen in Belize are facing. And so that's one of the clear distinctions that have to be drawn. Do you think that if it was a shorter span of time, you would have seen the same results in the court?
Even if it was a shorter span of time, I think possibly you would not have seen it in the court, but I think down the line you'll eventually see it. even if it's a short period of time, because there seems to be a change in how persons view it. Persons used to be comfortable with a 30-day, 60-day. Now persons are saying, with this new debate and the issues that have been happening, and they've seen persons being locked up for so long, persons are starting to become more wary of it. So we see that happening now, and I think that the culture is changing towards it.
Yeah. And when you think of I know you are in Belize for a bit of time now, and one of the things that we do have is being able to use other legislations if we wanted to charge these young men for gang-related activities.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that argument?
All right. My thoughts on the argument is that even with legislation to deal with gangs, we had a large gang trial in Jamaica recently. About over 20 persons were detained and tried, and the persons were found not guilty because with gangs it's difficult to try them and charge them and get them connected. We see in America where you have the RICO law, where they'll if you're part of a criminal organization, they work their legislation in such a way that you're able to charge even the street level dealer for something that the kingpin does. And I'm not certain about the gang legislation here in Belize, but definitely in Jamaica, they've used it, they've tried it, it hasn't worked as well. What needs to be stepped up is the level of intelligence and the level of policing that is done. We need to get more intelligence. If we know where these gentlemen are, if we can lock them up under the state of emergency, we know exactly where they are. Why are we not locking them up the other 364 days of the year? Yeah. So that really draws a question. We know where the gentlemen are, we know where they are. Let's get them. Let's get some intelligence on them. Let's bring it before the court and find them guilty, if it is that they are guilty. Yeah. But that is really the concern.
Yeah. It seems like such a lot. I mean, I've heard that very same issue being discussed here. If you know who the players are, if you know that they're more likely to engage in criminal activity, then you also know where you need to be looking to gather the evidence to bring legitimate charges.
There we go.
The state of emergency can be seen by some as just a shortcut to get them in prison. And, if we know that they have committed crimes, or if there is a reason for them to believe that they've committed crime, then yes, most likely that's where they should be. But what is the difference between circumventing the process of charging them and getting them sentenced to go to jail versus just taking them to jail for a month?
It is different, because if you're taking really and truly, you're not supposed to lock up someone beyond 72 hours without them being charged. They're not supposed to stay in custody for that length, in excess of that time. The state of emergency is, as the word says, is an emergency power. It's something different. It's something new. It is something that is supposed to be used under strenuous circumstances when you really don't have another angle. And really, it should be a last-ditch attempt to get somebody. Or if you need to arrest a crowd of persons or a riot, then you can do that. I really do think that we need to move away from using the state of emergency so frequently and just go back to really targeted policing, going into the communities, acting on intelligence, getting who we need to get and getting out as quickly as possible. And that has to be now coupled with the court and the legislation. We have to have strong legislation that allows our officers to go out and do their work effectively, and that when they put together their case and bring it before a judge, it is properly put together, and we can push the matter forward towards hopefully a guilty verdict if the person is guilty. So I think there's a big distinction there, and I think that there should be a focus on just regular community policing as opposed to just using a state of emergency repeatedly and locking up persons for a month.
Yeah. Now this is a pivotal development, because Jamaica is kind of the example that we look at in how we chose to police and to calm down the criminal activity we were seeing by going into the state of emergencies. What type of implication you think it can have for countries like Belize in looking forward?
It can have wide implications, because if it's a constitutional issue, and if it is that persons are being arrested for a long period of time and they believe that their rights are being infringed, then you might have the courts and the government bombarded by claims from the average citizen saying, hey, listen, my rights were infringed. I need monetary compensation for what you've done by locking me up for 6 months.
Yeah.
So that is one implication. Also, Belize can do or become like Jamaica, where we're very reliant on it, and we don't have another option. And that's the problem. If the state of emergency doesn't work, and we don't get who we want, and the crime continues to grow, at what point do we say, hey, this is not effective? At what point do we look to something else? So this really and truly cannot be a Band-Aid. It has to be something that is used along with other systems and tools by the government in order to bring forward a situation where we can get the criminals and get them off the streets and keep our population safe.
Yeah. And just to be clear, because I know that when we were discussing off camera, there is an issue in looking at the Constitution itself in Jamaica,
yes,
and a portion
yes,
that was repealed. Can you explain how much of an impact that had on the actual ruling?
All right, there is I'm not certain of how much of an impact it had on the ruling. I know that is what the attorneys argued. They
Yes.
argued that Section 26 of the Jamaican Constitution, which was repealed, that section was mentioned in the Emergency Powers Act. I think it was in 1938. And as a result of that being mentioned, that repeal section being mentioned in the act or being used as the basis of that act, then the entire act should be essentially repealed as well, or be seen as null and void. And that's the argument that they advanced to the judge. I think it would have had somewhat of a bearing on the judge. There is also the other issue of whether or not this judge, Mr. Justice Bertram Morrison, was able to rule by himself on a constitutional point. Because usually, if there's a constitutional issue, it needs to be dealt with by a constitutional court or before at least 3 judges sitting on a panel. And that was another issue that even, I believe, the Attorney General for Jamaica picked up on that point as well, And, it had been a large discussion because the Bar Association of Jamaica has gotten in on the issue. The Attorney General has said her words. So it is going to be a big point coming up. And I think that Belize needs to stay ahead of the curve. You don't want to get to this point.
Yeah. There's also another decision coming out tomorrow as well, right?
I believe there's another decision coming out tomorrow. I'm actually, as soon as I'm finished this interview, I'm going to get back on it to see what is coming out. But I know that the actual ruling from Justice Morrison will come out in its entirety before the end of the term in Jamaica. So I'm committed to staying on top of it and staying on point and, informing you guys whenever that comes up, because it's something that you need to keep your thumb on.
Absolutely.
Before it gets over here.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can definitely learn from the experiences
Certainly.
of others, and in this case of our Caribbean sister, Jamaica, who's been using the same way to address crime. I do appreciate you sharing and kind of trying to break down the developments happening there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. And with that, that is the latest that is happening in Jamaica in regards to the state of emergency there. That was Attorney Ludlow Black being able to share the recent developments. With that, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking to the creators of BK Sports.